From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad, episode 242. Always so much to talk about. So here we go. Some days I think the biggest problem in Washington isn't corruption. It isn't incompetence. It isn't even partisanship. The biggest problem is that nobody seems to know what the hell is going on anymore. Not the public, not the media, not the people working in government. And judging from the headlines lately, not even the people working for Donald Trump. I spent part of today looking at three completely different stories. One was about the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool turning into an algae experiment. One was about the Gordie Howe International Bridge connecting Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And one was about Trump blowing up a compromise involving Jay Clayton's nomination for Director of National Intelligence, while Republican senators tried to move it forward anyway. On the surface, these stories have absolutely nothing in common. One is a giant pool of water. One is a bridge. One is a nomination fight inside the Republican Party. But the more I investigated, the more they started looking like the same story, wearing different costumes. Every one of them starts with a plan. Every one of them ends with confusion. Every one of them involves people standing around wondering how something that should have been relatively straightforward turned into a 5-car political pileup. That's becoming a pattern in Washington. A bridge can't just be a bridge. A reflecting pool can't just be a reflecting pool. A nomination hearing can't just be a hearing. Everything has to become a crisis, a controversy, a feud, a conspiracy, a public food fight. At some point you start wondering whether chaos isn't the side effect anymore. Maybe chaos is the product. Maybe we're watching a government that treats planning the same way a toddler treats a vegetable. It gets pushed around the plate until somebody else has to deal with the mess. And that's exactly what connects all three of these stories. The Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool should be one of the easiest things in America to manage. It's a giant rectangle full of water. That's it. That's the assignment. Hold water, reflect the monuments. Don't turn into something you'd find behind a closed motel on the edge of town. Somehow Washington managed to turn that into a political controversy. Think about what I'm talking here. Okay, what I'm talking about here? This isn't nuclear policy. This isn't health care. This isn't the federal budget. This is a pool. A giant pool of water sitting between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. Millions of people have seen it. Millions of tourists have visited it. I've been there many years ago. The job description couldn't be simpler if it tried. Yet somehow one of the most recognizable landmarks in America became a national conversation involving algae, hydrogen peroxide, contractors, politicians, and finger pointing. The Trump administration pushed a renovation that included repainting the pool a darker, patriotic blue. Because apparently somebody looked around the country and concluded that America's biggest challenge wasn't inflation, housing costs, healthcare costs, insurance premiums, grocery prices, or any of the other things people actually complain about every day. No, the real emergency was apparently a pool that wasn't patriotic enough. Somewhere there had to be a meeting where grown adults sat around discussing the proper shade of freedom for a body of water. I would have paid money to sit in that room. Imagine explaining that to a family struggling to pay rent. Good news, we can't fix your health care, but we're making the water more American. Then reality showed up and did what reality always does. It ignored the press releases. The newly renovated patriotic pool, reflecting pool, started developing algae problems and turning green. Suddenly, crews were reportedly using hydrogen peroxide and advanced treatment systems to get things under control. Think about how absurd that is. One of the most famous landmarks in the United States is basically getting the same treatment as an apartment complex pool whose maintenance guy quit 3 weeks ago. Workers are dumping chemicals into the water while politicians are standing around trying to figure out whose fault algae is. And then the story somehow got even dumber because Trump directly blamed, you know where this is going, Obama. Of course he did. A reflecting pool turns green, and somehow Barack Obama ends up in the conversation. At this point, I'm surprised Obama hasn't been blamed for potholes, delayed flights, seasonal allergies, and the fact that those gas station hot dogs have been sitting under heat lamps since the Reagan administration. Obama's been out of office for years, yet Washington still treats him like he's hiding in a control room somewhere, personally directing every inconvenience in America. Apparently, algae has a political party now. We can't just have pond scum. We need liberal pond scum and conservative pond scum. We can't have a maintenance problem. We need a partisan maintenance problem. Give it another week, and some congressional committee will be issuing subpoenas to microorganisms. You'll have senators demanding answers from algae, while cable news panels debate whether pond growth is woke. And the funniest part is that nature couldn't possibly care less. Nature doesn't watch cable news. Nature doesn't care about campaign slogans. Nature doesn't care about talking points, consultants, studies, focus groups, press conferences, or political blame. Nature looked at a newly painted patriotic reflecting pool and said, "That's nice," and then grew algae anyway. That's the part Washington never seems to understand. Reality doesn't negotiate. Reality doesn't care who's in office. Reality doesn't care who gets blamed afterward. You can repaint the pool. You can hold meetings. You can issue statements. You can blame Barack. You can blame contractors. You can blame whoever the hell you want. But at the end of the day, algae doesn't care about politics. It just grows. And somehow, that's still more predictable than the people running Washington. The next story is about a bridge. And I know what you're thinking, some of you. Nobody has ever started a sentence with, "Jeff, tell me more about infrastructure." But stay with me because this isn't really a bridge story. It's a money story pretending to be a bridge story. The Gordie Howe International Bridge connects Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, Canada. This isn't some little country bridge that gets 3 cars and a raccoon every afternoon. This is one of the most important trade crossings in North America. Billions of dollars in goods move through that corridor every year. The entire point of building the Gordie Howe Bridge was to create another major crossing and provide competition to the nearby Ambassador Bridge, which sits only a few miles away. In other words, somebody spent billions of dollars creating a new bridge that threatened somebody else's revenue stream. And the moment you understand that, you understand why this story exists. Because that's where things suddenly got interesting. The owner of the competing Ambassador Bridge stood to lose traffic and money once the Gordie Howe Bridge opened. Then critics pointed out that the bridge owner's family had contributed $1 million to a Trump super PAC. Not long afterward, Trump moved to block the opening of the publicly funded Gordie Howe Bridge. The administration insists those events are completely unrelated. Fine. They're entitled to make that argument, but let's stop pretending ordinary Americans are stupid. A privately owned bridge stood to lose business, A competing publicly funded bridge was ready to open. $1 million went into Trump's political orbit. Then the competing bridge was blocked from its grand opening. The official explanation is that none of those events are connected. Maybe, but if that happened in your neighborhood, you'd ask questions. If that happened in your workplace, you'd ask questions. If that happened at your kid's lemonade stand, you'd ask questions. Yet somehow when politics gets involved, we're all supposed to stare straight ahead and pretend we don't see anything. Sorry, I don't buy it. And my favorite part is the lecture we're always given afterward. Competition, competition, competition. That's the magic word, right? We're told competition lowers prices, competition improves service, competition creates innovation, competition is the sacred religion of modern capitalism. Politicians, executives, consultants, economists, every guy who's ever worn a Bluetooth headset in public can't stop talking about competition until actual competition shows up. Then suddenly everybody develops concerns. Suddenly there are delays. Suddenly there are reviews. Suddenly there are studies. Suddenly there are committees. Suddenly there are obstacles. Suddenly everybody needs 6 more years to investigate something that was apparently fine yesterday. It's amazing how quickly people stop loving competition when they might personally lose money from it. What drives people crazy isn't even the decision itself. It's being told not to notice what's sitting directly in front of them. Money moves in one direction. Political decisions move in the same direction. Somebody benefits. Somebody gets exactly what they wanted. Then the public is told that connecting those dots is somehow irrational. No. That's called being awake. That's called having functioning eyes. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. If a donor benefits from a government decision, people are naturally going to wonder whether those two things might be related. That's not conspiracy thinking. That's basic curiosity. In fact, I'd be more concerned about the people who never ask the question. The irony here is impossible to miss. The same people who spend years celebrating competition suddenly become uncomfortable when real competition threatens somebody powerful. The message always ends up sounding the same. Competition is fantastic. Competition is the future. Competition makes America stronger. Just not when it affects the wrong billionaire. And that's when people stop trusting what they're being told. Our third story may be the most revealing because it exposes a problem that's becoming impossible to ignore. Senate Republicans spent weeks working on a compromise involving Jay Clayton's nomination for Director of National Intelligence. And let's be clear about something right from the start. These weren't Democrats trying to block Trump. These weren't anti-Trump Republicans staging some dramatic resistance movement. Tom Cotton was involved. Tom Tillis was involved. Republican senators spent weeks trying to help Trump get exactly what he wanted. This wasn't a fight against Trump. This was Republicans doing Trump's homework for him. Then Trump showed up and lit that homework on fire. After all the meetings, negotiations, discussions, phone calls, compromises, and political arm twisting, Trump stepped in, tried to blow the entire arrangement apart. That's what makes this story so remarkable. The people involved weren't opponents. They weren't critics. They weren't trying to embarrass Trump. They were trying to help him. They spent weeks building a compromise to move Jay Clayton's nomination forward. Then Trump suddenly decided he didn't like the compromise that had been built for his benefit. Here's the part that would have sounded completely insane a few years ago. Tom Cotton and Tom Tillis didn't immediately snap to attention and fall in line. They kept moving forward with the nomination hearings anyway. Stop and think about that, Wolfpack. These aren't Democrats. These aren't never Trump Republicans. These are Republican senators openly telling Trump, we've already spent weeks doing this, and we're moving ahead. When Tom Cotton is effectively telling Trump to get in line behind the hearing schedule, you've entered political territory nobody would have predicted. Imagine hiring a contractor, okay, to build your house. The crew spends weeks pouring the foundation, framing the walls, installing the roof, hanging the doors, and running the wiring. Then one afternoon you walk onto the construction site and announce, you've changed your mind and maybe you'd rather not have a house after all. Most people would expect the crew to pack up and leave. Republicans Tom Cotton and Tom Tillis basically looked at Trump and said, that's nice. We're finishing the house. That's why this story matters. It's not because Trump objected. Trump objects to things the way other people breathe. The remarkable part is that Republican senators who spent years falling in line are now publicly moving ahead with nomination hearings Trump wanted stopped. That's not a routine disagreement. That's not a minor procedural dispute. That's what happens when even the people trying to help start running out of patience. And that's the larger problem hiding underneath this story. The issue isn't loyalty anymore. The issue is predictability. How do you negotiate a compromise when nobody knows whether the compromise will still be acceptable next week? How do you build support for a plan when the person you're supporting might suddenly decide he doesn't support it anymore? How do you spend weeks solving a problem when the solution itself can become the next problem? At some point, planning becomes impossible because nobody knows what the target is. The target keeps moving. One day you're helping, the next day you're causing trouble. One day you're implementing the agenda, the next day you're undermining it. Even the people trying to help end up frustrated because they're playing a game where the rules keep changing in the middle of the inning. And when the people who are supposed to be on your side start moving ahead without you, that's usually a sign that the chaos is no longer confined to your opponents. It's spreading to your allies too. And what connects these stories, Wolfpack, is that none of them should have been stories in the first place. We're talking about a reflecting pool, a bridge, and a nomination hearing. And somehow Washington managed to turn all three into a three-ring circus. The reflecting pool became a political fight over algae. The bridge became a fight over money and influence. The nomination became Republican senators spending weeks helping Trump get what he wanted, only to have Trump suddenly decide he didn't want it anymore. Republicans Tom Cotton and Tom Tillis got fed up, and they just kept moving forward without Trump. If somebody pitched that storyline to Hollywood, the studio would reject it for being too unrealistic. Meanwhile, we're stuck playing political whack-a-mole run by caffeinated raccoons. Every time one controversy disappears, three more pop up to replace it. And maybe the most revealing part is that even Trump's allies seem exhausted. When even your own allies are getting tired of the chaos, that's not a warning sign. That's the warning siren. That's today's insight into a world gone mad. If you've enjoyed the podcast, found it informative, maybe got a laugh or two, please contribute to keeping the podcast around. I'm not backed by corporate media. There's no outside money other than my own wallet. So if you could please contribute to the GoFundMe, even a small donation makes a difference. The link is in the description below this episode. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. I'll be back Friday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolf Pack, remain skeptical. Question everything. Please, don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.
There is chaos in the world. Can't you see?